I found myself in a very specific position where people will come and pitch you. And most of the time, they pitch you something that you've been either you worked with, we worked on, that you tried out, or you didn't have a chance to try yet. And when I found to come up with a new idea, something really, really new, I know it's new. I know it's good. It's a good idea because I feel bad that I didn't think about that. Like I literally, if you come today on the mobility and you come with a completely new model, I'll feel bad. I'm like, how is that? Like I spent 4 years building a mobility startup and I didn't think about this idea. When I have that feeling, I know. Now there are a lot of things that might go wrong, maybe the team, maybe the execution, but I know this is a great idea.
Welcome to the Blue Card podcast. This is a space for long form conversations with operators, investors, and builders who are shaping Africa's future. Today, we'll be exploring venture investing, climate smart solutions, digital infrastructure, system resilience. This is the third, I think,
Yeah,
series for our investment series for the Blue Card podcast.
yeah,
Is the third one?
yeah.
Okay. So today we have, should I say, an August visitor in March, uh, an important part of Power Labs, uh, Toffene Kama, who is the principal investment officer at Mexico Ventures. This is an early stage impact focused arm of Mexico. Uh, I think I will pass the mic to Tofen to, introduce himself to the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Tobe. Thanks to the overall Power Labs team. I think it's a great idea to have this like deeper, longer form conversation that basically is also it's a good format to have it in by voice rather
Yeah,
than just in written.
yeah,
So my name is Tofen. I'm based here in Dakar, and I would say probably one of the OG in tech in the region. I've been operating, building companies, serving as an executive for a number of uh, industrial players, and starting companies and now investing for the last, what, 26 years now? Probably started around 2000. Um, yeah, I basically lead the investment team and operations for Mexico Ventures in the region. I have been in the investment space for the last 4 years. And as we all know, before that, I was a founder, and I started a couple of companies, one in the payment and remittance sector, and another one in the mobility space. Though I'm West African, I spent a significant part of my career in East Africa. A lot of
Interesting.
time in Kenya, in Rwanda, in Tanzania. But I didn't forget my West African roots. I think the first time I came in Nigeria was when we were building the Globacom network.
Oh wow,
I was actually one of the engineers.
Wow.
wow.
That's a long time ago. 2002, 2003. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly. I literally designed I was like basically the bid manager for them. And we literally sold the first platform to Globacom, and I was on the ground to make sure it's implemented. That
Oh,
was
okay.
Interesting.
the time when I was in Autocad.
So that's with people like maybe Lucent, Alcatel Lucent, or Ericsson, or one of these. Because there was no, well, we then it was these European companies that built the infrastructure. I almost got into telecoms, but I escaped.
Yeah, I think you'll probably see how relevant it is with the Power Lab story. But yeah, this was a moment where Huawei was not still a big player. It was really, really in the early days. Huawei came in a bit later. So it was really the competition was between Alcatel, Siemens, Nokia, obviously for the smartphones and some of the infra. But the Chinese came in maybe 5, 6 years later, and well, obviously over time they took over. But Glow was really a magnificent, like a very interesting period in the overall way telcos basically scaled. Like there was a moment where everyone was deploying. We were deploying Alcatel at Glow in Algeria, here in Senegal, in Cote d'Ivoire, almost everywhere, literally. There was a moment where we were deploying a platform every month for the 11 months in a row. and the platform would get filled up by the time we are done. And we've done that for 11 months in a row. So,
There's an interesting mix between technology and business models and markets. I think I will get back to that. Especially because it was an interesting time in Nigeria. So let me start with your investment approach, philosophy. How based on your engineering operator background, how does that inform your decision making? Right? How does your operator background influence signals that you trust when you're assessing founders? So, like how did that influence you when you were assessing Power Labs founders?
yeah, well, I'll start with maybe the generic that probably everyone does. Essentially, how do you make a decision when you have obviously a number of founders building more or less the same thing in the same space? So obviously, sometimes you need to pick a winner. I guess everyone does the same thing, evaluating teams, evaluating products, trying to assess the market, see how they differentiate themselves. I think these are like the basic. I don't want to get back to that because I think everyone does that. In my current work today, we like these three main sectors. We like fintech a lot, especially deeper layer fintech. We like agriculture and food systems. Obviously, if you don't eat, I think most of the rest of the issues will just become easily. Yeah, it's a fundamental part of thing that we all do like 2, 3 times a day. And it's yeah, it's an important sector. And everything that goes to what we call smart infrastructure. So everything that relate to what you guys are doing, energy, off-grid, renewables, up to nature-based solutions. So these are like the three sectors that we are looking at right now. Now, I have a very specific way of assessing, let's say, ideas, let's say that. And this is probably new, specific to me. Um, like basically, if I look at what I've done for the last 20 years, it's pretty much about diversity. I've done a lot, I've touched a lot of things from telcos to payments to mobility. I went to learn transportation, like from the deep, deep, deep dive. I also went to crypto at some point. I was even working in the sector. So obviously, I've touched a lot of things. And the mindset of a founder will never kid you. I think I was probably a founder before even being a founder. I was always been like this when I was in Alcatel. So it's quite difficult to work with because I was like constantly challenging everything.
Yeah.
So when I moved to become an investor, I found myself in a very specific position where people will come and pitch you. And most of the time they pitch you something that you've been either you worked with, we worked on, that you tried out, or you didn't have a chance to try yet. And when a founder come up with a new idea, something really, really new, I know it's new. I know it's good. It's a good idea because I feel bad that I didn't think about that. Like I literally, if you come today on the mobility and you come with a completely new model, I'll feel bad. I'm like, how is that? Like I spent 4 years building a mobility startup and I didn't think about this idea. When I have that feeling, I know. Now there are a lot of things that might go wrong, maybe the team, maybe the execution, but I know this is a great idea. I know quite well when I have that feeling. So this is probably unique to me. I'm not sure all investors have this feeling, but that's my first trigger that this is a good idea in an area that I know quite well because I feel really, really bad that like I feel even dumb. Like how come I didn't think about this? I feel even jealous, literally. Now, another thing I like, but we can dig deeper on this probably in later in the discussion. I like when the founder is less articulate. No, no, everyone say, Steve Jobs, the guy that are super articulate. Actually, I like when the founder is less articulate. If the founder is too articulate, I feel like I'd like to see in the team the COO or some of the co-founders who are less articulate. Because in our region, often I notice that people who are less articulate are more skilled on what they can do with their hands. Like most of the time, you have to make a choice. Like people who are grow up being able to execute well, they often tend to neglect the ability to explain that in an articulate way. And then people who grow up being extremely articulate and really, really optimize it, they kind of neglect the ability to build things by their hands. So I like to have that combination. So, and then if I have a choice, I'd rather choose the guy who can build things, but is less able to articulate it. Because we can always find a way to help them do that or hire people who can do that. So like these are like two, let's say, personal ways to do things. And the last piece is we do deep dives. Like when we come to a new sector, let's say, for example, energy, before investing on Power Labs, we looked at probably like 6 or 7 cases, went deep on them. And by the time we met Power Lab, we knew exactly what we were looking for. Even we didn't yet meet Power Lab. So when Rofem in our team came with the case, we knew already because we already made a significant time in studying and looking at the case. And we were quite sure that this is the kind of thing that we feel like could scale. It took us probably like 6 months later to meet the real company. So I'm not sure again if every team does this, but this is part of the way we operate. We like doing those deep dives on mobility, on electric vehicles, on biochar. Like we do a lot of these things. And then sometimes we are frustrated because we know what we'd like to see, but we don't see it yet. But we know it's gonna come.
No, that's super interesting. You said a couple of very interesting things there. I think one was around the um how articulate or not, right? Someone is and how much that determines how good they are with their hands. But I find that extremely interesting, right? From someone who has prior experience working in big corporates, right? I remember one of the key things that they used to assess was this thing called presence when they assess performance. And that really meant like, how can you sell yourself, right? And what I also saw in my past experience was, for example, like I struggled with the presence bit, right? And what I found, the reason why I struggled with that was because I felt it was a waste of time, right? And like the amount of time I should spend selling myself, like when would I actually do the job, right? And then you see people that oversell themselves also, and then they might get up in big corporates, right? But that is big corporates. When you come to startup world, that does not scale here, right? So that's the way I thought about it, but the way you explained it is also a very interesting. I think it's a similar thing. But then there's a second point you made, right? And it kind of brings me to this thing about where I feel like the great investors that I see, they tend to have a very contrarian view on how they make decisions, right? And they're not scared to share it, right? There are a couple of like firms and investors that I respect, including yourself, and they are not scared to kind of say this is like this thing that might not be logical to everyone else is a very important parameter for me, right, to invest. So, with all that being said, I actually have a very and a question that might challenge that, which is imagine you meet someone, right, who maybe hits some of those your criteria. So, like for example, your thesis that you had, right? They hit that, but then there's something about them or that thing that makes you uncomfortable, right? Do you not make that decision to invest, or like how do you deal with the discomfort that some ideas and some founders may bring? Because we're in a world where, I'm sorry, like yes, like you might have a clear idea, but things change quickly, right? And we had a discussion earlier around updating priors, right? So you mentioned you had a thesis, and then 6 months later you meet a company. A lot of things can change in 6 months from when you wrote that thesis to when you met that company. So how do you think about updating your priors, I guess is my question, if a lot of things change and dealing with a company that maybe has some of those things but not all? How does that work?
Yeah, well, entrepreneurship is really dynamic, like, and so we have to adapt constantly. This said, there is something that I know also about this region, which is if you are really in a deep trend, not just some puffy stuff, like deep trend tend to last quite long in this region. For example, you see telcos, when we're building the telcos, it's still here. Like MNOs are still operating and they're still doing business 20, 26 years later. So we are not afraid. For example, one of the things I like about founding teams is when the team is self-aware, when they know they need to go seek for advice, they need to reinvent themselves, they need to be able to know that there are some blind spots that they won't see now, they will only see when they hit the ground. So that is valid for us as well. Like we do not have like, obviously the other way we invest are relatively fix it. But the way we are assessing the teams, the product and stuff, we know by ourselves that these things change. So we are not afraid, and we are not expecting like a team to have it all. Honestly, I believe that part of what we do is selecting one company out of a number of them, and that selection is probably half of the work. Half of the rest is what you do after the investment. So unlike a lot of other investors, I do believe that if you as an operator take the time, take the risk of investing, let's say on Power Labs, on an area that you really believe in a team that you believe in a sector that you have some prior knowledge, prior experience, you should more or less be involved. I don't like the idea of, oh, we are just investors and we don't know. Uh, Definitely we don't. Our role is not to execute, but our role is to be involved and show the blind spot, especially if you have been working in the sector. You can tell them that if you go this direction, because I've been there or I've seen a lot of people getting hurt there, you'll have some issues. That's the minimum we can do. Now, it's not our role to tell to the founders, this is what you should do. But we can literally tell them that if you do this, you might have issue here and give them concrete example and facts. And I believe, you know, um, there is like the way I look at investment and operation is it's a more like a journey. There is a moment where you are building, you are excited, and you get some initial investment, and then you get to a point where now you've got I don't know, you raise, let's say for example 500K to a million, and you start building your first product, and you go to the market, and everything seems to be exciting, everything seems to be working, and you will wake up one day and nothing works. And then whether you're going to survive that shock or not is actually probably what defines companies that make it or not. And that dark period can last a long period here in this region. So that's why I feel like when the team is self-aware, they know there are a lot of things that they don't know yet. Even if they have a significant experience in the sector, by the time you hit the market and start charging customers and start deploying, you're gonna discover a lot of uncomfortable truth by yourself. So if you're prepared for that, we as investors, me as an investor, I'm prepared for that. Like when we invest, and I saw you guys coming with those nice ideas, I knew you're gonna get to a point where you're gonna come back to us and like, yo, problem here. So I believe that's half of the work we need to do. Get involved to a point where we can support on that particular difficult period. That's probably 50% of the work. Yeah.
How do you evaluate whether a climate or energy solution is genuinely resilient and scalable rather than simply technically innovative? Because for someone like me, like, yes, I want to build a product, but Tobe uses this term for the love of the game, right? I just love engineering. I love building things. So sometimes I just like when you said, there are a lot of ideas that you feel like, oh, I've thought about this thing before. Why wasn't I the one to? There are a lot of things like that where I beat myself like, oh, actually, sometimes like, I actually spoke to this person about this thing, right? It's so exciting, but it does not necessarily business, right? It could be an interesting idea technically, but it's not necessarily business. So how do you like? What kind of heuristic do you use to evaluate maybe okay this energy solution or climate tech solution is resilient and scalable, so it is a business rather than it's just technically innovative. Something can be innovative but it might not be able to build a business around it. So how do you do that? How do you?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you more like a generic theory about this rather than just energy. Now we can deep dive into energy a bit later. But here is two criteria I typically like to start from. The first is what I call, I wrote about this, I think, in December. It's called pioneer species, pioneer tech species. So when you are starting a company, you are never starting a company like you are starting in an ecosystem, you are starting in a value chain. And most of the time, founders don't think about this way, but in the value chain you are, um, we'd like to make sure that you are playing a significant role in that value chain, that you are not really touching the surface. Um, so I pay a lot of attention to that, like how deep you are in the value chain. So it doesn't mean sometimes it can be like building, for example, lower layer infrastructure with a bit of hardware. I could also be like building things with ground distribution network. But I have a much better view of that now, which is more like being on the front line. I can give you a few examples here, right? For example, in our first company, so in my last company, we were building like dispatching system for mobility. We built like literally QR code with some sort of unique security on the QR code with cards that we print for the consumer to use and scan in buses and build one of the most sophisticated dispatching network, like determining how many buses are waiting in the zone, how many people are waiting before even the bus comes in, being able to assemble a group of people and run the bus directly, things that you could never imagine. We ran with that for like a couple of years. And one of the best tech you can imagine. And then we realized that when we take a bus, we run it for a whole day and we made like 100,000 shilling. In the 100,000 shilling, at the end of the day, we went to refill the bus and we went to the Total station and we spent probably like 70,000 shilling. I'm like, what? Like all of these things that we built, hired the driver, did this whole cards, did all this dispatching, and we only go home with 30,000 shilling and we left the whole piece to Total. And then now we have to take those 30,000 shilling and share it between the bus driver, the bus owner, and us, the platform. And then I'm like, but we're actually just scratching the surface. We are not yet deep into it. And going deep to it was what actually dealing with the energy first, because the energy was the front line. Now, once you get the energy done, so instead of spending 70,000 shilling, we could spend maybe 40,000 shilling. Now, the dispatching and piece, all of the technology we've built can now get value. We could get like 60,000 shilling, double the revenue. Now we can talk. But if you are giving 70% of the business to some other player, that's where the problem is in the short term. So I like when companies are going deep in the value chain and building a particular know-how about it, and then making sure that even though they are small, that specific know-how, no matter how small it is, everyone will need you, even the biggest players. So until you get to that moment, you are probably just thinking, oh, I'm digitizing, this is nice, but you are probably, and you will realize that the customer is not always that willing to pay. Like you have to do a lot of effort for them to be willing to pay. It's often a signal that you are not yet there. Yeah. So that's one criteria. The second criteria now coming to energy is, for me, I always felt like there is a parallel between telcos and energy. I talked about this to Tobe. Like I was really on the front line seeing how we started building prepaid systems. We started building this telco GSM, then later on 3G, and how M-Pesa came into the play, how the distribution network worked out. And then for us equipment players, how we move from European industrial equipment players to the Chinese, what changed in the model. And I feel like the transition is happening also in the energy. So I like energy companies that have that understanding of what will matter first before anything else. Everything will matter over time. But if you look at the telcos, we build the network before the devices, for example, right? We build a network like the telco network here, and later on you have all these iPhones and stuff. But that came seven years later, after the 3G was already launched. UMTS was launched already in 2000. The iPhone came in 2007. Like 7 years of building and investing. So my view in energy that producing energy is probably now getting easier and easier with all these panels, and there is a significant capacity on building it, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper. What we are struggling with storage and distribution. And when I say distribution, it's distribution to the last mile. And I honestly believe that our grids are not going to do it. So I like companies who have the understanding. Not just so I can build nice tech, because this is where the business will come from. The business will not come just from tech, but it will come from a certain understanding of how the market evolves. And then you can build now product to align with that market. You know where you have to spend effort. You know what kind of skill set you need to develop to do that. For example, I don't know, an MNO like MTN may have a lot of money to invest in solar, but they're certainly not a grid. When you wake up here in Dakar at 4 a.m. and the grid is off, everyone is like super upset. even if it is for 2 minutes. You are not a grid if you are an industrial player in telco or other things. So to be able to build a network, to build capacity, to build uh, reliability at that level where even a couple of minutes is like people start shouting, you are not designed to do that. Somebody has to do it. And it may well be like guys like you guys.
Well, thank you for that answer. That first answer really about understanding the value chain
Yeah.
is really really critical. Like in fact, we look at spreadsheets sometimes. Like when you have a solution, and the example you gave where you talked about going home with 30,000 shillings, and you have to still divvy that money with all the other players, while the person providing the energy gets 70,000. I think about that a lot. In fact, even like I think about that almost every day in terms of, oh, this particular equipment, how much is it? If I look at the total cost of setup, if I'm already paying an external vendor maybe a big part of the money, so what am I really a wrapper around that vendor? And we see it even in AI now, where you say you're an AI company, but most of the money you're giving it to Nvidia to buy Nvidia GPUs. So you need to know where do you stand in your innovation. What amount of value are you able to capture? Like, it might be important, but are you really, really important? Are you able to capture enough value? Otherwise, you will not have like a very scalable business. So thank you a lot for the answer.
So, Toffan, one thing that really, honestly, intrigues me, and I think I really appreciate about your form of investing and making decisions, is how it's very grounded on reality, like real experience that you've had that used to make your decisions. Um, so, in line with that, I'm curious to know what's something that you learned the hard way as an investor that no book prepared you for.
Well, it comes down to probably just discovering the other side. Like, I spent a lot of time as an executive, as a founder. So you kind of feel like you knew it all. And I knew I wouldn't be like surprised by the technologies and even the financial part of it. What I was probably surprised with is like the time it takes to convince even ourselves and then other investors in a case. Like sometimes you believe in a case, you do the work, and then you have to convince, and then you have to do probably more work than the founder themselves. Like we write something like 60 pages or something like that on a case. Power Labs was like 71 or something.
Wow.
So I was not prepared for that. Like literally going through so many different aspects of the business to a point where you can almost like pitch the idea to others. So as a founder, I didn't know that. Yeah, uh,
Well, I'm just curious on that point that you said 60, 71 pages. Can you give, I don't know, high level, like the different themes of things that are in those pages, right? Because I mean that sounds to me like, I think people underestimate the amount of, I think I underestimate the amount of detail that you go into. So I'm just curious to know, like in those 71 pages, what are the themes of things that are included in there, if you could share?
well, yeah. I mean, I think every fund they have their own way of operating. So I wouldn't say everyone does the same, but we like really going deep into certain areas. So we do not like write long documentation, more like a Q&A.
Yeah.
So if you capture the Q&A, it can take like pages. For example, the point I was discussing, like what is that you understand in the market that other founders do not understand in terms of, for example, how the energy will evolve. We can go deep on that, and then people ask questions and we answer. Um, things like for example, just the founder themselves, like founder awareness. What are the kind of skill set? Let's say, for example, you say you want to be like the operator that other industrial players will outsource the management of their off grid, right? So we want to know if you understand the type of skill set you need to build internally to do that. Why would a big factory trust you to handle you the operation of their off grid? This is something that if it cut for a couple of minutes, Maybe they lose a lot of money. What is that the kind of skills that you need to build to have that credibility? So you see, it's not just about like, oh, the team is great, I like the founders. Not that. We want to know if the team is fit for what you're optimizing for. Once you are convinced that you know where you're going, that you have the product for it, we want to know that you're gonna hire this type of skill set that's gonna go after that. And I can, like, we rarely go through the generic stuff. Oh, the team is the company is growing at X. Okay, we like that, but we know that's probably just temporary. It might not be that sustainable. We want to know if the company is growing, whether there is a deeper driver why it's growing. And if you see the deeper driver, even if the company is not growing today, we can sustain because we know it's gonna come, right? So it is more like we operate more like in a Q&A format rather than like writing, like a book about the company. Yeah. But if you aggregate it over time and you see all the question and answer, it can be like quite deep. Yeah.
Wow.
Africa is is not a country, so and the different parts of Africa, there are things that are unique even regarding investments, maybe East Africa compared to West Africa, Francophone Africa compared to Anglophone Africa. But what's a hard truth about building in Africa, if I might, use that to take Africa as a unit, that you think the ecosystem still is not ready to admit? Because building in Africa, there's what they call the Africa tax, right? Even when you want to raise money, even when you share ideas, sometimes, like, I mean, I'm speaking from my own pain. Like, when you share some ideas, that, like, there is almost as if there's this expectation that you should not be innovating, if I might use that term.
Yeah.
Like, maybe you should not be innovating. Maybe you should just, I don't know, selling something, right? And I sometimes this is my own belief that there are some problems that requires, like, you look at like country like Cuba innovating in medical technology, right? Yes, they might not have the biggest GDP, they might have a lot of challenges still, but that's does not prevent them from still innovating in some particular key areas. I had this discussion with our investors last year, where we talk about innovation, and I was like, look at India. Take India for example. India has a space program. India has semiconductor economy, and yet India, they're still struggling with electricity, still struggling with poverty. So I think we can walk and chew gum. Like, yes, we are struggling with these basic things, but that should not really stop innovation. Like, go to India, they struggle with the kind of things that you see here in Africa, but at the same time, the same India, you are still seeing a lot of very interesting innovation coming out from that place. That's my one take on how, my take about innovation in Africa, where I feel we should actually innovate regardless of we should whatever the current development condition is. But that's just speaking from my own lens, or I'm biased towards technology. But I'm asking you as someone, a venture capitalist, that, like, okay, what is it that we are not ready to admit about building in Africa that is very different from other parts of the world?
Yeah, I like the example if you gave about India. I think Africa is definitely not uniform. So there are some trends that are deep enough to be quite universal in the region. So if you catch one of those, it's gonna probably be the same everywhere. You see, always give the example of GSM. Like when prepaid started, prepaid just was everywhere, and it was just the model to bet on. Same, you see mobile money, different flavors, but mobile money has been implemented everywhere at the same time, more or less. You're probably going to be seeing this on the EV sector. You're going to be seeing EV everywhere, pretty much, because it's just the right technology. So there are some things that are deep trends, and those deep trends, pretty much when they fit with the way we operate, they do not see Nigeria as Nigeria. They see West Africa as a whole, and you're probably going to see them implemented everywhere. Now, it doesn't mean that every technology should follow that. So within those deep trends, you probably have different countries. I would rather say different ecosystems. Different ecosystems are optimized at the moment where we are for certain things. And I really like this idea of building a particular know-how This is valid for startup, but I actually believe it's even valid for nations. When other startup, when you are building, you are building with constraint and limited resources. So you are not going to build Google from the get-go right now in Nigeria. So you know that not everything gonna be fine, but you can determine that this or that particular area, I have maybe the right yield for that. I have maybe some natural resources, some particular minerals for that. I have maybe some geographic position, whatever is an advantage I can build on. I can actually go deep in those, even though everything is not fine, because I have limited resources, I have some constraint. So I do not need to aim for everything going fine because you probably want to go anywhere. And that's what we've been doing in our region for so long. But you can optimize for 2 or 3 sectors where you can be actually the best of the best of the best. Best in the country, best in the region, best in Africa at least, and probably best in the world. It doesn't mean that when you go, everything is fine in the country. Maybe electricity won't be fine, but maybe you are very good at mobility. Maybe the whole agriculture is not fine, but you are probably the best maize producer in the whole region, and everyone will come to you for that. By the way, if you look at the way our nations are operating, everyone is talking about sovereignty, but you probably know that that's more like a wet dream. But sovereignty today means that you are optimizing for something so unique that everyone will come to. Look at Taiwan, such a small country, and everyone goes to them for these chips, right? Look at this lithography that you find for the Netherlands. Everyone goes there for that. Um, so sometimes it's pure technology, but probably for us it would be like pure technology associated with some natural advantage that you have. Look at Dakar. We have 700 kilometers of coastal line, right? Shouldn't we really try to do something about it instead of trying to do everything at the same time? And this is also valid for startups. I believe for startups, you already have limited constraint. So you have to decide in your value chain that limited thing that you can do like the best of the best so that everyone else will come to you for that. And that's come down to like building that, being on that front line and building that know-how.
So talking about hard things like building in Africa, if you could tell first-time founders building in hard infrastructure sectors like energy one thing, what would it be?
There is one hard truth I have scars in my face to show it. Uh, that I would definitely want every African founders to know and not make the same mistake. And so many of us are doing the same mistake. So where to start from? If your business model involves sending big invoices to, let's say, a big player in this region, you're probably gonna struggle. Let's say, for example, you are building this platform and you are selling it to the national grid, and it's required you to send, I don't know, $200,000 bills, $500,000 bills to the millions, and then you have to go after them to get paid. If your business model around that, or the usual suspects, you have to send some bills to MTN or to Safaricom or to Orange, and then you expect that you're gonna make millions of that at a long term, you are probably really, 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 really going to suffer. And it's even going to be worse when you are building something even more exceptional. Like the higher end you aim to, the worse it's gonna be for you. I even tell to find that if you are building solution at the in the beginning where you need to sell it to, for example, an MNO, make sure that they never see it as strategic. Play under the radar. Like make it even go to the commercial department and work with them, but don't go to the CEO or to the group CEO, because as they see it as strategic, you they'll probably kill you. Even if they don't want to kill you, they'll probably kill you though, right? So it comes down to like playing a certain role in the value chain. Like if you really feel like this is the role you have to occupy, be the first in the money. Collect the money and then you're gonna redistribute. But if somebody collect the money before you and then you have to send them bills, you're probably gonna suffer, right? So there is a term we like it. I remember back then when I was just the last year of my startup, I was talking to Tijan from Partech, and we call this the greedy customer. So you're building this super nice stuff, And then you go and find a major customer. And at the first, I thought that the customer really doesn't see it like as value. Like basically, they've seen it all. And eventually, as you start explaining, they start to see your innovation and your idea. And there is a moment where they understand. And and then when they really, really get it and can understand now the value and how big this could be, they move from being what could be your customer and they start tapping in. Why don't we build a joint venture to build this between us? That's really where things go bad. So if you are really a first time founder, try to build things in a low radar. If you need a big industrial customer, if you don't need it, it's even better. But really make sure that you are on the front line on also on the revenue collection. Don't rely on the business where you need to send big bills to big industrial players. Even just getting just paid, you're gonna suffer. And this is valid in so many sectors, right? So if our labs were the only business were like, I'm gonna go to the grid and send them bills and build this nice stuff, I know you're gonna suffer.
I think we'll discuss about that
Yeah.
furthermore, like
Yeah.
outside of this.
There's a lot of there are so many layers to that conversation
To unpack from
to
it.
unpack. Like,
Yeah.
and I know we've spoken about this offline many times, so but that's a longer form podcast
Yes.
discussion.
Yeah. So the final question is quite long, but I'll try to shorten it. Right. So there is research done by a think tank last year that renewable energy generation outpaced the world's appetite for electricity. So basically, um, I remember when I was in uni when they do projections for solar, wind, and those numbers. This was 2010, 2011. The numbers were so ridiculous. Like it was not something that you should take serious. But when you look at the numbers now, something has happened, right? It's exponential, the growth, right? So when you think about like China, India, they've been largely responsible for the growth in or the surge in renewables. And you look at country like Pakistan, that is basically we speak a lot about the utility the spiral.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go deep into that so because of time, but you see where in real time everybody's just moving to solar, right? So when you take all this data about how should I say developing countries are now making use of renewables more and more in their energy mix. So what does this turning point mean for Africa's energy transition, right? Because you still see people like every day I check the news, I'm saying, oh, we are still signing the I don't want to name the name of the companies, but this German company are still signing one deal to fix the grid. For they've been signing the deal for the past 6-7 years, right? And so some people make their decisions based on those, like, oh, they will fix the grid or what happens. But the thing is, the reality right now is renewables are a big part of our lives here in Nigeria. Yeah, like we have solar in these premises. I have solar at home. Everywhere I go, you just see renewables. Before EVs used to be something that like, oh, who is going to drive an EV in Nigeria? That's what people are going to tell you before. But now I'm driving on the road, I'm seeing EVs.
Yeah.
Right. So when you look at the way the pace at which renewables is growing in China, in India, and how that mix renewables is supplying a big chunk of the energy mix of some of these countries. What does this mean for Africa's energy transition? What does it even mean for Africa's energy security? Right? What does it mean for us?
Yeah, first of all, it means that we haven't been pretty much in the production. That's what it means. It means that others are producing and have built significant production capacity in terms of solar, in terms of battery. We aren't there.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Even though it sounds good and nice, but we are not. Look at what's happening right now with the whole conflict between Iran and you see that there is this choke point which is being constrained. It means that even if there is a significant capacity of production from China and so on, if you have a choke point on that Hormuz Strait and then on the Suez Canal and so on, it means that we are so dependent on production that's happening outside somewhere else, which is frustrating to me, to be very honest, because the material to build those batteries, to build those solar panels, if you look very deep, they're here. So you are shipping these things from here, go there, transform them to something we need, and then bring them back. It's a lot of back and forth. So that's the first thing. Now, on the good news, it means also that um, we have to pay attention a lot into usage. I was looking at the study last time of how much energy the average American use, how much energy the average Chinese or European use versus Africa, and we are like 30x less, 30x if not more. So when you see our grids player saying that, oh, you are overusing energy and then you have to reduce your consumption, I feel extremely mad because you feel like we don't understand what's happening. It's
We
not
should.
about like it's like somebody coming today and say, oh, you are using too much airtime. You have to reduce it. You would go crazy.
Yeah.
So the usage of energy is pretty much give you a good idea of how healthy our economies are going. If you are using less energy, it probably means that you're not really doing great. So the idea shouldn't be like, should we limit usage? The idea should be like, should we get enough production? And should we distribute that production in such a way that wherever you are, you need? Now, there is one specificity pretty much the dilemma you had back then between mobile and fixed, which is our usage of energy are going to be exponentially broad and dynamic, I would say. For example, we all invested in the EV sector, especially electric bikes and stuff. And the problem we are facing right now is that most players didn't anticipate the challenge of producing energy when all these bikes are on the road and running. If you have thousands and thousands of a battery takes 2 hours to recharge. You have to swap. Swapping is fast, like 2 minutes. But by the time the battery should be there being recharged 2 hours earlier. And then you have all these guys bumping on the same station. And then now you have to wait for hours. So it's a great idea, but most guys have forgotten basically what the problem to resolve is, which is making sure that energy is available on a portable, pretty much like your mobile phone, by the way.
I totally agree with everything you said. Like I think this conversation should we should have a part two of this
100%.
of this conversation because there are interesting things that you spoke about and some things that we are already doing and we are working on. Thank you very much, Tofen. Talking to you has been really insightful. Um, before we close, because I think we should not be the only one enjoying this, this knowledge. Are there places where listeners can find you on, on the internet? Maybe LinkedIn,
Or do you have
maybe
a blog,
socials, or a
newsletter?
blog, or yeah, you mentioned you wrote something last year. Do you have a blog? We can add it to our show notes, so listeners can find some of your writing and get to experience some of this.
Yeah, I'm not, well, I'm not like a social media person, to be very honest, but I typically share some ideas, typically on LinkedIn. So when we invest, I generally, if you look at my LinkedIn activity, you have an idea of what kind of topic that we're going to invest in the future.
All
So
right. All right.
it's a good, yeah.
So we'll add it. We'll add it to the show notes. We'll add your LinkedIn um profile to the show notes so people can click on it and get to get even small atoms of this knowledge that we got here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Toffene Kama, the Blue Couch podcast. It's been I don't know. I just have to go and decompress to think about some of the things you've said, and I'm sure I'm going to have another meeting with you to explore some other ideas, some of the things you've spoken about. Um, so thank you very much. This is the end of this episode. You can listen to the Blue Card podcast on all platforms, all audio streaming platforms, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, on X, and on LinkedIn. It's Power Labs HQ. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time on the Blue Card podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. And I just wanted to also, just last word, encourage other founders to take like their own way of sharing knowledge, sharing experiences. I feel like what made to me Y Combinator was all these essays and experience that Paul Graham kind of shared on what not to do, more like than just what to do. And I feel like we haven't yet in our African region, we haven't built that kind of knowledge base on the specific issue that a particular African founder basically faces, which means what? Which means that when you are building, it takes more time because you'll do the same mistake that everyone was doing. And we are not sharing that much about that. We always share about nice things about fundraising. But for me, it's sharing maybe mistakes is probably better than because you're avoiding others to do the same mistake. What would take you maybe 6 months might take you like a couple of months because you know what not to do, right? So yeah, I encourage to see more of this, more podcasts, and then also more startups taking their own approach of sharing
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I learned a lot from just reading
Yeah.
incident reports. Like when maybe there's a problem, just reading what happened, how it happened, reading like detailed forensics about it. I learned a lot growing up, reading stuff like that. So how things fail, failure modes teaches you like a lot of things, like a lot of things that rather than just you just want to talk about like how it worked. Like how you talk about Paul Graham, I remember I'm an OG reader. I don't agree about everything he says, but I think it's the wealth of information that you get from from him. And I think maybe it's a cultural thing that you just need to live from that hiding knowledge to sharing knowledge.
Yeah.
I think it's a cultural thing where people. I don't want to get religious here. Where people, I ask them questions, they say, "Oh, it's God," or they say something like, "Just tell me what actually happened."
Yeah.
They don't really want to give you actual details, and so I think people should share, like you said,
Yeah.
share failures, share like very detailed events that happened and what happened, what they did, how they managed, how they responded to these events. That would be that's the university, to be honest. That's going to help a lot of founders, not even first time founders alone. Everyone, it's going to
Everyone.
help everyone in the ecosystem. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll continue this chat some other time. All right.
Thanks so much, Toffene.